I went from an organization of around 65,000 students, and Avon Maitland has just over 17,000 students. Very different student population. But the other really important differential that I've experienced, and it's been really enlightening for me, is how geography plays in. Avon Maitland is 4 times the size of what I was used to. And over the years, I've always interacted with colleagues that have been from very large geographic boards, and I've appreciated the comments they've made to me. But I have to say, I've really experienced now more closely how important schools are in our communities when you have large geography. And in many cases, what I'm finding is the school itself is really the hub of the community. It might be the only meeting spot where people can come together. And I was speaking a bit earlier about pride. When I've talked to parents and students and grandparents and family members, there is such a deep pride in the schools in their community. They're much more than just a learning location. That is where people come together and they actually create community itself.
So today's episode is a first in that I've now officially interviewed two directors from the same school board. I interviewed Lisa Walsh from Avon Maitland School Board, who retired this year, and her replacement is Dr. Graham Shantz, who I formerly knew from his time in Waterloo region, but now is the director. And so I reached out to Graham earlier and wanted to know how it was going. And so we talk about his time as both as a student in Avon Maitland and now as the leader of the school division. And so again, I appreciate Graham's approach and perspective on it. You can tell he's very human-centered in the way he talks about the people that he serves, and that's really at the core of it. So just a very easy and natural flowing conversation. And again, so appreciate his insights on even the differences between urban and rural school divisions and how sometimes there's a nuance different there that's worth exploring and worth understanding. So enjoy my conversation today with Dr. Graham Shantz.
So Graham, as you and I were talking, we were doing a little bit of a pre-call, if you will. I noticed this referee jersey over your right shoulder. Tell me a little bit about your career as a referee and maybe how that helped you in your career as an educator.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dean. And it's fun to reflect back on times of your life and things that have been important with you. And refereeing, officiating was an important part of my life. I enjoyed playing hockey, competitive hockey, all the way through. And when I was out of junior and senior hockey, had the opportunity to start officiating. And the jersey that you see at the back, it's signed by a former NHL referee, Don Van Massenhoven, from the Strathroy area. And I had an opportunity in an exhibition junior game to actually work with him on the ice, and a really fond memory. And I think to answer your question of the learnings of that, officiating on the ice is all about working with people, working with the skaters, the players, but also the coaches that are on the bench as well. And making sure, obviously, structures are in place and understandings. But it's like anything else in our life. It's making sure that you have positive relationships and you build on those relationships and ensure at the end of the day, the kids that are on the ice are having a great time, a safe time, and enjoying the great game of hockey.
I often listen as a former first grade teacher. I often felt like as a referee in many cases, right? Like it's half the time you're trying to break up fights and keep kids like we can do this. So I am sure your skills as a referee came in very handy as well, like you said, in your role now, but also in your time in the classroom. It's definitely something that every teacher has to have a little bit of referee in them.
Yeah, so true.
So you are now a few months into a new role as the director in Avon Maitland, and I knew you from your time back in Waterloo region, which is just a little bit to the east of where you are now. So 5 months in, what are your first impressions of Avon Maitland?
I have to say, it has been fantastic to be back in Maitland District School Board. I'm not sure if many people know, but I grew up in the district and had the opportunity as a student to attend schools here. and have just a ton of wonderful memories and many of those over the last couple of months have been flowing back. I'm really proud to say that my mother still lives on our family farm in Perth County, and yeah, it's just been fantastic. And a lot of the memories that have flown back to me have just been reinforced with what I've been seeing in our schools and in the community. I've first off been just overwhelmed by the welcoming nature of everyone. And that's one of the pulls that brought me here to Avon Maitland, knowing that there are fantastic people, wonderful communities that we get to serve. I can share with you when I get into schools, and I've been to over half of them already, there is just this deep pride in the work that's happening, a deep centered approach around children. When I go in, it's not uncommon for teachers to tell me of the successes that they've had in the classrooms, for our support staff to share just some of the wonderful things that they've been able to influence and support students through. And that's just wonderful to know that you're part of an organization that has such a positive culture. And also wonderful knowing that our students here have great learning opportunities that they experience on a regular basis.
When you talk about culture, and I'd never thought of this before until you mentioned that you attending here as a student, you feel similar kind of, I'll say vibes or whatever, like that things in a positive way haven't changed in terms of that. Maybe it's a feeling of welcomeness or whatever. Oftentimes when I think about culture in schools, I always, put the credit on, I think rightly to the leadership, right? In schools, it's about principals and yes, they play a major role in that culture and you play a major role in the culture of your district. But obviously, since the time you were in school till now, there's been a lot of changes. And so it can't just be about leadership. And again, I don't know where I'm going with this question other than, do you have any sense of the influence on school culture beyond just the leaders?
You know what, that's a really interesting question, Dean. And first off, I'm going to say I'm really happy you didn't ask how long ago it was that I was in a school here in Avon Maitland. So thank you for that. But yeah, my belief is that culture is something that evolves over time. And you're absolutely right that leadership has a tremendous impact on that. But I really want to make sure that we're broadening out the concept of leadership.
Yeah.
Leadership in the formal sense of management and principals and superintendents and director, absolutely, there can be a positive impact there. But there is so much informal leadership that happens in schools on a daily basis. Our teachers, our educators, our support staff, though maybe not in the formal sense that we sometimes speak to, they are providing leadership for classes of 21 to 33 students on a daily basis. And I always believe that's where the culture is actually incubated and formulated the most. The experience that our students have is really working directly with the people that are in front of them. And obviously, our teachers play a huge part in that. But I don't want to discredit the secretary at the front door that
Absolutely.
welcomes a family into the school for the very first time. They've just moved into the district. And that smile, that welcoming face, those kind words, those make a tremendous difference on how our schools are experienced. I think of the custodian walking down the hall, and I've worked with dozens and dozens of custodians. Not only do they do a great job in the school, but they interact positively with kids. They help students out. They make them feel proud of the environment that they're in as well. And I think it's not a simplistic thing. It's really an interwitting or internetting of all of those people that help evolve the culture and really drive it to the place that it creates that feeling of warmth and of care, which our students ultimately need to be successful in the classroom.
And it's also something that's passed down because that custodian, she retires at some point and somebody's got to take over. And how do they know? And maybe this leads into, again, I'd love for your sort of perspective on moving from a pretty large urban school board in Waterloo to something that's definitely more rural. Talk about the dynamics, and even in our pre-conversation, you were touching on something I thought was really fascinating around the role of schools and how that might be different in an urban center versus a rural center, and I think that kind of speaks to culture and so forth as well. So, just what's that difference? What have you noticed about that?
Yeah, and it's Dean, I'm glad you brought that back up because it's been fascinating learning for me. It's really been part of a growth for my leadership journey as well. As you were mentioning, I went from an organization of around 65,000 students, and Avon Maitland has just over 17,000 students. Very different student population. But the other really important differential that I've experienced, and it's been really enlightening for me, is how geography plays in. Avon Maitland is 4 times the size of what I was used to, and over the years, I've always interacted with colleagues that have been from very large geographic boards, and I've appreciated the comments they've made to me, but I have to say I've really experienced now more closely how important schools are in our communities when you have large geography. And in many cases, what I'm finding is the school itself is really the hub of the community. It might be the only meeting spot where people can come together. And I was speaking a bit earlier about pride. When I've talked to parents and students and grandparents and family members, there is such a deep pride in the schools in their community. They're much more than just a learning location. That is where people come together and they actually create community itself. And that to me has been such a rewarding thing. We started our conversation talking about where I grew up. I went to a school of probably around a little less than 200 students, I would guess at the time. But for me, it was the biggest place in the world. And that's where I made friends, made lifelong connections in many ways. And that's all part of that culture that can be developed and really, really fostered in school settings.
It speaks to me about trust. It speaks to me about shared goals and purpose. And I don't know, I'm being a little nostalgic as well because I grew up in a small town and I'm feeling a lot of the things that you're saying in terms of, yeah, that's a difference. And I think the challenge that urban schools face is there's just so many more competing places, spaces, and things that can take away from that trust building and that focal point of, hey, we're in this together. And so I think those are our colleagues that work in those spaces probably have to work extra hard to do that because it's not a natural, like you said, a natural point of meeting and community that in our smaller places maybe do that. Just tremendous that you've noticed that. In our conversation so far, you've, I think, alluded to some, I think I get a sense of your own sort of educational philosophy and what you value and what you think is important. And I'm teaching a grad class right now, and I'm asking those students what their educational philosophy is. And that's not something that I don't know that maybe many of them have been asked before, but I'm curious. And I'd ask you, what is your kind of educational philosophy that you bring to Avon Maitland?
Yeah, it's funny when we use the word philosophy, people always take a step back because it seems like this big word. But what I've learned over time, one's philosophy is really how they are, the way they come into the world, interact with other people, and the impressions that they will leave with people as well. And I think when I speak to my personal beliefs, a school system itself is a people organization. Our greatest assets are our employees and our students, and the impact that we can have in a classroom goes well beyond the walls of our schools. It permeates out into the community, not only for the time they're with us, but quite honestly, for generations of time. And that's an amazing gift. And it's something that can't be taken for granted. And as I chat with and speak with leaders in our organization, we constantly want to reinforce the importance of all of the members of our community. Parents have an important role in the education of their children. Community members, the partnerships that we have throughout the district, they're incredibly important. And those are things that we need to continue to foster and deepen. And it all links back to that philosophy that we're part of a greater community. We have a really important part as an educator in a community and as a leader in the community, but ultimately we're providing a service that will benefit the community at a large scale.
No, I appreciate that. And I think what that mindset, that philosophy does is really sets you up for success and innovation and all those kind of things because you're telling people like you matter, you're important, and people do really good work when they feel like that. Like people want it. Listen, you don't go into education without knowing it's going to be hard. As much as we are all aware of things like burnout and the mental health crisis that kids and adults are facing, we can't sugarcoat the job of teaching and saying it's going to be easy. It's not. It's hard work. It's taxing. But I think what I've experienced and what I know is that if leaders have my back and support me and understand me as a human being and want what's best for me as a person, I, I'm happy to do that work. I'm happy to engage in that work. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
And I'd throw in there, whenever we talk about the hard work that goes into it, also the rewards that come with that. As an educator, your teaching experience, there is nothing more rewarding than seeing a student be successful. And success presents itself in so many different ways, but there is nothing like going home at the end of the day. I feel like I'm putting on a PR for hiring into Avon Maitland right now,
Good
but
for you. Go for it.
there there isn't anything more rewarding than having the opportunity to impact a student in a positive way. And I tell you, all the work that goes into it by all of our employees is well worth it at the end of the day.
And I would add to that, that's where leaders also play a role in helping everyone see those successes. Because listen, if you're a classroom teacher and you also are wearing that referee shirt at the same time, you can feel exhausted at the end of the day. And sometimes you miss the fact that, listen, it was a hard day, but there were some big wins in there that happened, or even little wins that might not be recognized. So I'm always encouraged when I see principals or colleagues, whoever that is, who call out those successes that you might have missed because you're in a very frantic and busy world, that you might have missed the fact that, hey, did you realize that kid had, I'll use my grade 1 analogy, learned to tie their shoe today, right? That was a win, man. We've been working on that for a while. I forgot. Oh yeah. So I think that's another great part of leaders, is to call out those successes that they might not even see. Because teachers are always like, "Oh, I just do what I do." They don't even realize some of the awesome things that they do every day. No, that's worth celebrating.
Yeah. And you know what you're saying, Dean? It really comes back to one of the roles of a leader is to motivate. And when we look into any of our practices around this, people need to have clear expectations of what they need to do, but they need to be recognized and celebrated as well. And when you get that right combination of those things happening, people will reach to the moon to ensure they do whatever a student needs. And that's a great feeling for any leader. It can be a leader here at the education center or in a school setting, when you have a team working together, motivated, full of pride for the work that they can do. There's not a better setting to be part of.
This episode is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships, also known as ALP. We are a professional learning consulting group that serves communities across North America. We are partners, designers, and agents for change. You can learn more about the work we do at alplearn.com. And now back to the show.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit. You and I first crossed paths a number of years ago in and around technology. And I know that's been a big part of your portfolio over your career, and you value the use of technology when used effectively in classrooms. And listen, Ontario is not the only place. I can't remember. Oh, I was just listening to a little podcast from the US around the number of states and schools that are banning cell phones. And so Ontario has that, British Columbia, Alberta, trying to think of Saskatchewan, but generally speaking, this has become a pretty hot topic in education. And along with Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation about reduction of cell phone use, here we are. As somebody who, like myself, values that appropriate use of technology, like how do you navigate that in terms of advocating for students to have a degree of access and to be able to utilize technology, and sort of juxtapose with this? I don't want to say it's anti-technology, because I don't know if that's exactly what it is, but potentially conflicting ideas.
Yeah, and you're so right, Dean, that this has it's been publicized extensively over the last couple months. The lead up to the school year, and obviously the launch of the school year, most papers have been running stories on the cell phone ban. I I think really, if I can shift the focus, speak to the ban itself initially, but really, that's more of a legislative piece that's come into play. And I'd even classify it as a tool that's being placed in our schools' hands. Really, the focus and the underlying benefit of something like this is the way that we can focus students' learning time. And for an educator, really, we recognize we only have so many minutes with students each day. And each of those minutes we want to maximize to the greatest extent. So obviously, if students are being distracted or focusing on things other than the content of that day, we want to minimize those distractions. So in that way, something like the legislation that's come into play is really effective and helpful. But I think the more important piece, and really what you led us into this dialogue on, is how are we focusing our classroom time? And our teachers do just an amazing job of creating engaging opportunities for students. And when you're in a classroom setting and students have the opportunity to have technology, and it can be anything from iPads, Chromebooks, green boards, whatever the case may be, you can see their eyes light up and the engagement that can occur. So I can attest that technology is an incredibly effective tool when used in the appropriate way. And more importantly, I think, is what the skills that we're developing with the use of technology. There's the logistical skills of the actual use of the technology itself, but more importantly are the life skills that are being taught, the skills of communication, collaboration, critical and creative thinking. All of those pieces can really be enabled through the use of effective technology. In many ways, Dean, I'm happy that this legislation has come in place. I think it gives us a framework that both schools and our families can appreciate and understand. But I think we need to take it a step further and really focus in on how the technology is being used in class. And I know you and I were chatting a little bit, and I think there's going to be something that's not even on the horizon anymore. I was going to say on the horizon, but I think something that we need to contend with right now is the use of artificial intelligence. It is something that our students are engaging with already. And as a school system, I think this is a focus. I know that I've spoken to our leadership that we really need to spend some time. We've been dabbling in it, but we really need to set up some frameworks and really engage
Yeah.
our students and our employees in using it in an effective way now.
I really appreciate that approach. I think what I was grateful for you to say, and you didn't use this framing, but that's what I took it away as you're depoliticizing this idea, right? Which is that was the way in which I think governments sometimes were trying to put this politicize this issue. And it's no, we're not going to do that. So we're going to look at this in terms of, like you said, if this is a helpful way that we can support student learning, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. Which I always is an advocate for. There were just always times where close your laptops. We're not doing that now because we want to engage. We want to engage in our time together. So I think it all comes down to empowering teachers and reducing any kind of stress that they might feel. And again, I both know teachers who never had a problem with this before because they had great classroom management skills and they handled this without any issue at all. So it was a non-issue for a lot of people. And for those that it was, for whatever reason, maybe it helps them overcome something that can lead them to something else. But yet underlying all this is the fact that it's a part of our lives. And if us as educators are not educating our kids in how to use this effectively, then who, right?
That's
Maybe mom and dad, but probably not.
It's so true, Dean. And I even think beyond that, we have to think of what are the skills that we're trying to provide to our students. Our students will graduate from our system, and they are going to move on to post-secondary, into the workforce, a whole variety of skills. And employers are going to have expectations as well.
Absolutely.
And in many cases, technology is going to be a huge part of whatever that student's pathway is as far as employment, but there are some societal expectations about when and how it's being used. And I'd even go as far as to say it's about creating healthy relationships too. Everyone in my household has a phone, and there's times where we don't use it appropriately to the detriment of our family.
Sure.
And we have to reassess that at times and have conversations about that. And maybe that's not fully the responsibility of a school board, but I think it's a component of what
Sure.
we can help individuals know how to interact with people in a really positive way outside of schools as well.
And just again, the thing that I think we're recognizing is this is not a kid problem. This is a human problem that we're
Yeah.
trying to navigate. As you said, like you and I both will find ourselves guilty of, should have been focusing, because we know that these things are extremely powerful. And there's a whole other conversation about the design of these tools to be addictive. We know that's a fact.
That
And
could be a
so
whole other podcast if we wanted to
yes,
have that.
and but I think that, so again, this is where all this stuff can be very appropriate to say we're not going to use this right now. But at the same time, I think as adults, I'm trying to figure this out for myself. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I don't know exactly how this is all supposed to work. This is the beautiful thing I'm doing right now with my grad students when it comes to AI. I said, listen, I'm excited about trying to figure this out. I don't know when we should use it, exactly how we should use it, but we're going to figure this out together. And as long as we have a strong relationship, going back to what you said at the beginning about those relationships, if they're in place, we can learn this together. Like, we can learn from each other around this one. So
Yeah.
that's the part where I get kind of excited about it. I want to learn too.
Yeah, and excitement's the right word because there's so many opportunities. And Dean, we're not going to date ourselves here, but the reality is school systems have been through this before. I think of when the calculator came into schools, there was debates on should it be used, when should it be used, we shouldn't be using it. The internet came into our lives, same arguments happen. And I think we're at that same point with artificial intelligence. It's here. We can pretend to ignore it and say it doesn't have a place. But the reality is, it's going to be part of our students' lives. It's going to be part of our lives as well. And I, like yourself, see this as an incredibly exciting opportunity. It's a bit of a scary one, too, because we don't
Yeah,
know the pathway. We don't know what it's going to look like. But I think this is one where exploring, understanding, doing it in a safe way with certain parameters around it can be an incredibly exciting opportunity for both our students and our staff.
absolutely. Absolutely. So the title of my podcast is the Canadian Ed Leadership Show. I'm having you on because you are a Canadian leader. Can you tell us about a leadership challenge that you've had in the past that sort of cemented in your brain as, and again, it could be something that a leadership challenge in which a lot of success was come out of it, or maybe one where it didn't go well, but you have learned from that story you like. I'm just looking for a leadership challenge that kind of
Sure.
comes to mind.
One that pops out, and I would say it's a bit of a recurring thing in our education sector, is always centered around budget and dollars associated with that. And I reflect back in our sector over the last 6 years or so, and for anyone in the sector knows that we've had a really challenging time. There has been at times some labor unrest that we've had to manage through. Obviously, we've had the shared experience of the pandemic, which has impacted people in ways we probably don't even fully appreciate yet and may not for years to come. And through that, there have been large shifts in fiscal policy to naturally deal with the challenges that were in front of us as a society. But what I've seen in the last few years in our sector, we're shifting back to maybe what I'd classify as a more traditional fiscal policy in the province, and one we probably had to move to for a whole lot of economic reasons. But it is amazing. I've worked through this in other organizations as well, and we're going to be working through this in Avon Maitland also. But making sure and really taking the organization through a process of refocusing and ensuring that our finances are being directed to the priorities of the organization. And as those words come off my tongue, that seems like a nice, easy thing to work through, but it's incredibly challenging. And I've experienced that in the past. It becomes incredibly emotional, but it can also, as we've said in a few other topics, be an incredibly rewarding opportunity for an organization as well. So that's something, Dean, that I've dealt with in the past. We're going to be working through that over the course of this coming year to make sure that we're compliant with ministry regulations and balancing our budget appropriately, and ultimately ensuring the dollars that our community has given us, we're utilizing in the best way to support students that are sitting in our classrooms. So I share that challenge because I think that's
Hmm.
one that probably a lot of people
Yeah.
can relate to. It's lots of stories across the province right now of boards working through this process. And I'd say even if you go outside our sector, I think a lot of other public institutions and private organizations are probably grappling with the same challenge, really acclimatizing to a post-pandemic reality and establishing the priorities within their organizations to make sure they're in line with the expectations.
And I think I know what you're alluding to is the fact that in that process, some people are going to get I don't want to say that just because it sounds trite, but I don't mean to sound, their feelings hurt, right? Because they've invested time in a particular program or initiative that may be good. It's not that it's something bad, but as you said, there's limited resources. So we have to think about how do we prioritize. I think about the story that comes to mind because I asked this question to Tom D'Amico in Ottawa Catholic, who I think the story, and I'll just synthesize it, was like they were spending X number of dollars on STEM initiatives, but the way they were doing it, it was a small group of people that were getting funding and they were doing really good work. But problem was he's saying that only impacts whatever, 30 people. Let's take that same money, but do it differently. Now, in that process of spreading that out so that more people could benefit from it, there were 5 or 6 people who had more of those resources going to them, who had I can't remember, was their job shifted or just
Mhm.
had fewer. So they felt in that situation that was something against them. It had nothing to do with them. It was just like, so you could see, and I know that as you go through this process, you're going to run into that. There's going to be people who are going to say, but you used to give us this much, we had this much money to do this. Now we don't have that. And it's not about something wrong with what you did. It's just, we have to make these kind of decisions. So you're prepping yourself to be able to have those conversations and try to build the trust with people so that when that decision comes, they might not like it, but they understand it. No, we're different, but I get it.
And you're really speaking to the how. I outlined the what, but the how is actually more important in many cases. And in some cases, I should use the why, just linking back to Simon Sinek.
Yeah.
But, that's where, and it really links back to where we started. It talks about culture within the organization, things like trust and understanding. And part of the how is making sure that people are part of the process, that they have a voice. And there's lots of different vehicles for voice.
Mhm.
In some cases, it's through union leadership. In other cases, it's through committee work. But if people feel part of the solution, and again, they may not be happy with some of the choices, but they can actually articulate and understand the why this is happening. In many cases, that allows an organization to make some of those challenging decisions in a really successful way.
Yeah, no, those are things that are coming for you. And I know you're well poised to handle those leadership challenges, and there'll be more to come for sure. I always like asking this question. I know it's a hard one for many people, but I think it's an important one. I want you to pick one person. I know you could pick 100,000
Oh,
people, but one person in education that you're grateful for. And ideally, I would love it to be somebody who might actually listen to this podcast and
okay.
hear their name mentioned as somebody that you're grateful for.
Yeah, and that's a tough question. That
I know
really
it is.
is. My mind first goes to some of the mentors that I've had and people that I've worked with, and there's countless ones that I could speak about that really have taught me important lessons in leadership, but more so have taught me how to be a person. And I think at the end of the day, that's probably what all of us are looking for. But my mind shifts to a few staff members, and I've worked with many amazing staff members. You mentioned earlier being a grade one teacher, and there are a few different elementary teachers that I've worked with that I have just been amazed by. And I know our topic is about leadership, and these people showed leadership in a very different way than we sometimes think of. Maybe not so much the formal leadership. And I think of one teacher, her name's Moira Bartlett, who was an amazing elementary primary teacher as well as a special education teacher. And year over year, had the opportunity to see her making tremendous impact in student lives and in parents' lives, but also informally provide leadership to colleagues as well. And I always took the opportunity to be in a meeting or a setting with her because of the way she carried herself and the approach she took with the people, the care she exhibited. And again, that's one person that I can speak to. There's many that I couldn't even name them all,
Sure.
that I'm
I know.
so appreciative of the learnings that I've had throughout the journey with them.
Great. I appreciate you. I appreciate you calling somebody out like that. So hopefully Moira is listening. So as we wrap up our time together, I like to just get to know you at a little bit more personal, professional level. But my first question is more focused on your professional learning and or growth around what are you reading and or listening to? Some people prefer the listening part of it, but can you share anything that's caught your attention right currently?
Yeah, I won't list all the ministry memos that I'm required to
No,
read.
I'm not
Those
interested in
ones,
those. Not interested in those.
I found myself recently looping back to a book. It was published a few years ago, and I referenced Simon Sinek a little bit earlier, but his book, The Infinite Game. And I think most people know Starting with
Mhm.
Why, that came out maybe 15, 20 years ago. But I was really interested in looping back because I had not actually read that when it first came out. And it speaks to really changing the mindset from a win scenario to appreciating that from a leadership standpoint, the biggest contribution we make to leaders is as leaders is really the long-term health of the organization. And that when you start thinking long term and thinking of gains in the way of developing people and ensuring that there's adequate leadership and skilled leadership in place, it truly makes them an impact. And as an organization, that creates health within it and allows it to move forward. So that's one that I've had recently that I've really enjoyed delving back into and just hearing a bit of his work and reflecting on the job that I have to do as well.
Nice, nice. So less professional, but more, okay, it's Friday night, it's whatever. I need to just rest. Been a big week, worked hard. What do you watch or guilty pleasure, anything like that?
Oh,
Maybe it's
okay.
something you watch with your family or just by yourself. I don't know. What do you got there?
Yeah, I love it. I'm a little embarrassed to share, but our household is into a bit of the sci-fi and also the superhero scene. So
Okay.
it wouldn't be uncommon when the kids are home. It doesn't happen nearly as much with the age of my kids, but a lot of the Marvel movies, those are classics in our household. And I have to admit, just recently this summer, I got hooked a little bit on the Rings of Power, me back to some of my elementary days of reading Lord of the Rings, and I've had a bit of fun when time permits watching that series as well.
Nice. Yeah. So my 25-year-old daughter is in town with us. And so we've tried to set up this one where we alternate movie weeks where she picks one that she knows I haven't watched, but she thinks I might like. And I get to go back to like my 80s or 90s list and say, yep, you've not seen Breakfast Club yet? Okay, so that's been an interesting cross generational thing. But we always say it has to be something that I think it can't be just something that I like that I want you to watch. So,
Yeah, yeah. We've done something similar with some of the classics like Back to the Future. And with Beetlejuice being out again, we've made sure we've encouraged the kids to watch that with us as well. And it's a laugh for everyone, to be honest. I'm
that's
sure
right.
you're experiencing the same thing with your daughter.
That's right. And you forget like contextual things. Is that how that was back then? Oh yeah, I forgot. It's a little weird, but that's how we used to roll. So anyway, I love those kind of cross generational things. So my last question is, and I must warn you, I interviewed your predecessor, Lisa. And when I asked her this question, she did a pretty bang up job of describing the Avon Maitland area in terms of like places that people should check out. I, I think she was ready to be hired. I don't know. Maybe she's gone off and works for tourism in Ontario or whatever. What I'm asking for is give me one or two lesser known places in the area. It could be a restaurant, it could be a park, whatever. That if I was coming there and say, Dean, you might not see this right away, but you should check out these places or things. What would you
Excellent.
say?
I'll give you a couple that are really special to me. And when people think of Avon Maitland, there's obviously places like the Stratford Festival, the Blythe
Sure.
Festival. Lake Huron is obviously beautiful. But I'd encourage people, I love being outdoors. And two spots that are really important to our family. If you're ever in Stratford, take the opportunity to walk along the river. There's an island there called Tom Patterson Island. My wife and I actually got married on that island,
Nice.
and it's a wonderful place on a weekend to just go take a picnic lunch and then just enjoy the environment that's there. And the other place that is just fantastic, and it's been a lot of years and a lot of people committing time to, is the G2G rail trail. And it goes all the way from Goderich all the way over to Guelph. So for those that like to walk or to bike, That's maybe not one that you would have heard of as much,
No.
but it's beautiful. And I think I'd like to do a shout out to the many volunteers that have made that a reality for so many families to be able to enjoy
Cool.
and to be part of. So I hope,
Awesome.
I know there's lots to say. I'm sure Lisa did do a great
No,
job.
no. So
Uh,
I'll give you credit for that. You came up with your own, which I think is awesome. Listen, Graham, I know you're a busy guy, lots of things on the go for you, but I so appreciate your time today. I learned lots, and I'm always, this is probably the most extended time you and I have had to chat. So really appreciative of all your shares and your insights, and just thanks for your time.
I really appreciate Dean, and thank you for focusing on Canadian education leadership. We need people to keep moving into this sector and to make the choice to move into leadership, formal and informal. And I really appreciate what you do to promote it.
It's my pleasure, and there are no shortage of great leaders in our country, and you represent that group as well. So thanks, Graham.